we'll be recording this meeting, so be careful what you do, so that people who weren't here today or people who loved it so much want to see it again will have the ability. And then one other kind of Zoom item is, rather than going around and having everyone introduce themselves, which can be a little awkward on Zoom, and because we have such a full agenda, we will be recording the attendance based on the participant list. So if you're able to make sure that your name is correct in the participant box, and if you can even add your agency name alongside your name, that's super helpful. And then I think that's all the logistics. One more thing I wanted to mention, Shelley and I sent out with the agenda some edits to the charter based on our desire to incorporate anti-racist principles into the structure of how our work group is operating. And that's just sort of our first step in trying to make sure that we include equity in this work group. So we sent out edits to the charter, and we were hoping to adopt them today. I haven't received any comments or concerns or questions on those. So I don't know if people want more time or if we can move forward with those changes to the charter. Do you have any thoughts on that, Shelley?
Yeah, so we added some language to the charter, and I don't know if anybody's had a chance to review those, but if you have and you have any comments, let us know. We'd like to put forward a motion to accept the charter today, and I can actually show you what the language looks like. It's not a lot. So let me go ahead and pull that up and share my screen, just so that we can make sure you guys have taken a look at it. All right, so you guys should be seeing my screen. We've got some small items that we're adding. The main information that we're adding is towards the bottom here, which is basically a diversity and inclusion statement. If you guys want to take a look at that and let us know if there's any questions you have, or if you have anything you want to add, please feel free to let us know. What I'd like to do is have you guys review it while we're on the meeting today and come back to this at the end and take a vote to see if you guys approve of it. There are links in the email that was sent out for this meeting. So if you want to take a look at it directly on your own screen, you can do that as well. I would ask if there's any comments at this time. All right, having none, go ahead and continue on, Christine.
Okay, thanks, Shelley. I was just scrolling through the participant list, trying to see if Nick Martorano has joined us yet, but I'm not seeing his name. Are you with us yet, Nick?
He just popped up.
Okay. Well, I'll do his introduction while he's getting situated. Our first presentation today is from the director of the California Water Quality Monitoring Council. And we wanted to just allow Nick a few minutes, Nick Martorano is who I'm introducing, to give us an update on what the council has been up to since we last met. Are you there, Nick? I see him.
Sorry,
yes.
You can hear me. Now you can hear me.
Yes, there you are.
Okay, sorry.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kristen. Sorry about that. Yeah, thanks for the introduction. So the council has been up to a few things since this group has last met. We had a meeting in September, late September, and our next meeting is actually December 3rd, virtually from 10 to 4. Primarily, the council has been really working on first solidifying a strategic plan, which they did approve back in July, and then we spoke about in September kind of how to prioritize their their actions moving forward, especially into next year. And that was an interesting discussion that ended up in this interim between September and December 3rd, really getting them to focus on taking the 20 or so projects they have, or objectives and goals that they have identified in their strategic plan, and getting them to focus on which ones are the most important, or their top 5. And I also asked the work group chairs from the various work groups to provide their input on what they felt was most important to them as a work group, as well, to kind of see what the differences were between the council members and the work groups. So we expect to talk about that more December 3rd, and kind of describing a work plan moving forward. Other things on the horizon, we've been working on a updated memorandum of understanding between the Cal EPA and the Natural Resources Agency secretaries. And we have a meeting with Nancy Vogel at the Natural Resources Agency next week to talk and to describe how Resources Agency wants to engage moving forward. A little bit of history: back in 2018, around this time, the CNRA secretary at the time, through their representatives, decided to kind of roll back what they used to have as a co-chair leadership on the council, as well as they had dedicated a half a position from their resources to be an assistant director to the council to help with the collaboration work that I primarily do. So since that time, it's been primarily a Cal EPA focused, especially the water board's kind of efforts to try to keep the things moving in a positive direction. So this, with the new secretaries and the ability to kind of meet virtually, we're going to take advantage of that next week and start talking about how this new leadership wants to move forward with the responsibilities of the leadership of the council. So we'll talk more about that December 3rd as well. We've also been working on wastewater-based epidemiology related to COVID-19, and working in support of those efforts that are being done at the Water Board by UC Berkeley, by the POTWs, the major POTWs in California, and SFEI is playing a role in that. And what started as a letter of support is really kind of growing into something a little bit larger. So we'll touch on that at the next meeting, as well as have just general updates on that effort from Karen Mogus and Greg Gearhart is going to talk a little bit more about the data side of things and how we're collecting that data and what we hope to use from that moving forward. Other things that are pertinent to this group, we had a plastic pollution steering committee meeting. Maybe it was this week. All the days together, but the thing might have been this week, earlier this week, or maybe last week. And that's if you're not familiar, is a multi-state agency group that's really focused on just plastic pollution in general, whether that be macro or micro. And I participate on that steering committee and talk a lot about this work group and the work that you all are doing, both as a larger work group and in the subcommittees. And they're really excited to be working with you all moving forward as the methods document starts to come out, and then the great work that Wynn and Tony are doing in that data subcommittee, as well as with homelessness as well. So all the subcommittees are really of great interest to this group, which spans a lot of coastal agencies as well as the internal agencies. So as kind of the information from this group gets brought forward, they're really excited to continue working with this larger group to kind of impact management going forward. Other than that, I'm working with the National Council again. That was on hiatus with the current administration kind of I don't know, messing with the leadership of ACWI, which was a federal group, but the National Council was basically the California Council on a national scale. So it was all the states, and then with EPA and USGS were the chairs of that larger organization. They're moving forward with a virtual conference, which will be April 19th through the 23rd. Put out a call for abstracts to the work groups and the leaders lists. But if you haven't already, you can reach out to me directly. It's really a unique opportunity. These usually are really large events, multi-day events, and usually you have to be in person. But with with the virtual environment, it's allowing a lot more people to access it. and attend. And it's a really great way to highlight the work that you're doing within the water quality realm, and get it out there to the entire nation and beyond. So it's a really unique opportunity to take advantage of. So that's happening next April, and abstracts the deadline may have passed, but if you've got one that maybe you slip through the cracks and you want to try to get it to me, I can maybe try to get it in there. But there should be some great opportunities to move that. Any questions? Well, thanks for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to this meeting. So sorry, it took me technical difficulties this morning.
All right, thanks, Nick. No questions from the group. You guys are quiet today.
I have a quick question.
Great.
This is Tony Hale.
Hey, Tony.
BI. Hey, Nick, thanks for presenting. Just wanted to follow up on one particular issue. You said that you were exploring the prioritization for the strategic plan and really coming to understand any differences between the council itself and then the work groups. Have you, when would that kind of report out on that happen? Is it at the next monitoring council meeting? Kind of what's the structure for that?
Yeah, it's going to, the next big discussion is going to be the December 3rd council meeting. I've kind of spoke with Karen Mogus earlier this week, and we're gonna roll out kind of what the data suggests. There was some nice overlap between, there was only 4 work groups that really responded, but of those work groups, there was some interesting data and some overlap in the priorities, but there was also some interesting data where there was some where the biggest one with the most votes, if you want to call it that, didn't have much representation from the work groups. So the council members thought it was important, but the work groups didn't necessarily. So having an opportunity to discuss that and what we're hoping for at that December 3rd meeting and during that kind of longer item is to, okay, this is what you're saying is important to you. Now, who on the council is willing to sponsor this project moving forward, whether that be committing a subcommittee to really start to work plan how to address those priorities or how to start implementing actual actions moving forward, whether that be dedicating resources from staff or identifying some sort of funding resources to help support those at the work groups. So getting them to really put, if it's important to them and they want to work on it, then we should be working on it. And if not, then we can whittle it down further until maybe it's from 5 to 3, or maybe it's even less. But just getting them to really think about real actions and not necessarily paying as much lip service. So that'll be more rolled out on December 3rd. So I encourage you all to attend. And it'll be recorded too if you miss it or you're busy.
This is Wynn. I wanted to jump in with another question. What's the best way to help? I mean, I totally share that vision of getting people to conduct real action instead of just lip service. And I'm wondering, how can we on the subcommittees help you achieve that agenda? I mean, is it like, do you need to be able to adequately like sell these concepts to them? Is there any resources that you need or that we could provide to help with that pitch, to get them to actually do those actions? I'm kind of thinking about like, well, one of the key things that kind of stalls people out is they don't know like how big of a deal is this going to be. For example, like, am I going to have to shell out, $1 million to get this done? Or is this something simple that like one geek could handle in a night?
Right. Yeah.
And so maybe like having that kind of input from, if it's like a data question, then like from the data committee could help to kind of alleviate some of those stressors. I'm not even sure what these key questions are for them, but I would love to start addressing them.
Oh, thanks, Wynn. I think that's great. I think that as this kind of moves forward, they're going to realize that, the council members are going to need to lean on the work groups, and just being energetic and willing to help. I mean, the hardest part is that everything at this point is really heavily voluntary, and then we cherry pick and leverage resources as they come in and try to stretch those as far as we can. But it really takes, you know, somebody that's dedicated like yourself to the actual work, that's willing to help them put in the time or help clarify, okay, what is the low hanging fruit? What is something that's a really quick data project that might take a couple of days for somebody that's a whiz at R or something, but might otherwise seem insurmountable to somebody who doesn't understand that sort of framework. So I think just being available, I mean, just the fact that you're asking that question is really positive. There are other work groups that aren't as active like this. I mean, I'm seeing 50 or so people meeting this work group. That's fantastic. And they're across the spectrum. The flows is very similar. There's a handful of work groups that are super engaged, energetic, and focused. And this is an important topic. And that's really what the council has to rely upon. There's other work groups that kind of wax and wane, and maybe are a little bit older or longer in the tooth and not have as much to do and so those aren't going to get probably as much of the attention just because of the lack of energy behind it. But with the trash, I think just, again, making yourself available, and if I put a call out for your input and for help, then just respond and to provide me with that information. And then, you know, when we have meetings and items that, or if we're having meetings coming up, because we have them quarterly, and there's something that you guys want to talk about, reach out to me and say, look, we would really be interested in talking to council about this and getting this moving forward and getting extra support. So those are really the main mechanisms from our point. And if you see grant opportunities or other things where the council can help provide letters of support or provide a more outreach, that's another great way. And again, when you guys put out, like when this new report comes out that's being funded by OPC, that's going to be huge. We'll leverage the council to promote that across their sectors and to, you know, get the energy moving forward. And then the next step, I think, is going to be, okay, we've established these methods. Then, okay, what do we do with the data that we start collecting, which is, I think, is going to be really important. And the work that your subcommittee is going to start to bubble to the surface.
Thank you. Yeah, that makes it a lot more clear to me how that all goes down. So thanks.
All right, thanks, Nick. Any other questions for Nick?
Any
I
others?
just saw one comment to, oh, yeah, it looks like you already sent it. The link for the April meeting.
No, I sent a link for a November meeting, November 2021, just if we're announcing meetings. But if you could send a link to the April meeting, Nick, that would be great.
I will, if there is one available. I will look for it.
Thank you.
All right. Looks like we're pretty much on schedule. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic, and that is Erick Burres. Erick, did you want me to present your slides, or did you want to do that?
It'd probably be easier if you do it.
Okay. All right.
Well, good morning. Thanks for allowing me to speak to everybody today. About a month or so ago, I approached Shelley with the question of doing a trash webinar focused on monitoring and with the potential of expanding it. So she thought it was a great idea and invited me to bring this topic to all of you. We can move on to the next slide.
Sure.
One of my roles at the water boards is helping the monitoring council, and I've served as a coordinator for the California Water Quality Monitoring Collaboration Network. And I've also been helping out as a co-facilitator for the Safe to Swim work group. There's a lot of topics that need to be addressed and covered when we do Safe to Swim. And there was a lot of new people coming in, and I thought it'd be great to host a webinar series on just safe to swim science and monitoring the management of our beaches. And so we put together in 2017 and crossed over in 2018, a webinar series, and we had 8 different topics. I have a little picture down there from our playlist, but everything was recorded. We have it in one playlist. So if anybody wanted to understand what's happening in the world of safe to swim, if it was why we do it, policy-wise, what's driving it, how do we collect samples and then process those, modeling, reduction, source tracking, all of that is in this playlist. And so we've had a lot of folks that have been brought on the board, new employees, citizen groups that want to participate. This is able to bring them up to speed on what's going on in the realm of safe to swim in California. It was a one presentation a month, given live, recorded, and then we also were able to, because we have a web page with the council, also have the PowerPoints. So people can download all the content and then watch the video and take notes and follow up. So it seemed like a really good format, got really good feedback. We also did the same thing for citizen science to cover the diversity of citizen science programs and how people can participate in citizen science. It's not one size fits all. A lot of groups approach citizen science differently. They have different problems, but they also want to see the solution and the resolution of their stewardship challenges being met. Some by going through courts, some by having legislation put in place, some by having BMPs put in place, or protective measures so that they don't see degradation of the water quality and the benefits that are to be realized for that watershed. So the proposal is to do something like this for the trash work group. Shelley, next slide. So the big goals is sharing. It's about communication. It's about documenting where we're at now, where we'd like to go in the future with trash monitoring and trash science. It's about leveraging this forum that we have with the Monitoring Council and increasing coordination and partnership development. So Nick just mentioned this multi-state work group on plastics in the environment. So having resources like this being available to anybody will be able to bridge some of those gaps with people that really don't know who we are, may have missed a meeting, want to participate. They can watch the video, they can learn, they can share, they can help us do what we're doing. We can help them as well. And then the overall goal, of course, is better science and environmental stewardship. So when we're able to work together, that's where we can have that. And then overall, trash science is cool. And it's highlighting that for people that may not be working in this realm, somebody that may want to, somebody who may not even know about it, but when they come across this information, they say, hey, that's what I want to do. And it helps us to build towards that equity. We're making our programs and what we do more accessible to everybody when we put them onto not just this platform of having a webinar, but by putting it on YouTube, anybody can access it 24/7, and YouTube offers the opportunity to have translations. So we're expanding the ability for participation in the work that we're doing. Yeah. Next slide. So the topics that we're looking at, and we could launch this next month or into the starting in the new year with a presentation on trash policy and the actions that are going on right now, presentation on trash monitoring, and we'd love to have some updates on everything that Shelley just learned by doing her project. Also, I know there's another webinar series going on microplastics, but it'd be great to have something within our series on microplastic monitoring. I get a lot of questions, not just from the citizen monitoring community, but from others looking for methodologies on how to go about doing microplastic monitoring, and then characterizing what they find. I've had a couple webinars and some meetings that covered the unsheltered community in relation to safe to swim. It's something that's important within our work group, and I'd love to see a webinar on that, as well as the ton of work that you guys are doing for trash data science and harmonization. We could bring in a speaker to talk about a community science project. There's quite a few going on throughout the state. Maybe the working group here has some ideas that they'd like to present topic-wise, or just talk about the work that they're doing as a subcommittee group. Evan's willing to talk about Coastal Cleanup Day and its long history and what they're trying to achieve. And I don't think it would be a decent series if we didn't talk about trash reduction efforts. BMPs could be one talking about marine and freshwater, bring in multiple presenters, or we could have separate. So proposal is hopefully we could get 6 presentations, but we can go beyond that. It's, as long as we have people that are willing to share what they're working on, we can open it up. I will host it. I will do all the logistics work to make that happen. But I need you guys to help by being a presenter, working together in teams. We don't have to have one person. We can have this as teams presenting. And then if you know somebody that's doing awesome work that would be perfect for this, just make the introductions happen so we can put this webinar series together. So I'd really like to open it up to questions and discussions now, Shelley.
Sounds good. Does anybody have any questions? I think what Erick's looking for are some volunteers for taking some of those topics on, and potentially some additional ideas. If anybody's got some other ideas about things that they would want to see or present. So I will lead off the volunteering, and I will volunteer Tony Hale and I to participate in the trash monitoring webinar and share the information that we have based on the method evaluation study we've been doing.
All right, thank you, Shelley.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Erick, I'll chime in. Shelley, that's exactly what I was hoping you and Tony might offer. So I'm really excited. It's the handbook, or I believe you have a handbook coming up that'll be published in the next year. Excited about that. On the trash policy piece, I think it'd be really neat to see kind of an implementation status, just knowing different permits are at different phases right now, and just kind of getting a more hearing from different regions, maybe regional board staff themselves could be a piece. And then on unsheltered individual, kind of those experiencing homelessness and the water quality connection. I'm a co-chair along with Dahlia, who's unfortunately not on the call today, for now named the Homeless Encampment Subcommittee. I mean, just for simplicity. And we'll touch on this, I think, later on our agenda today, but absolutely happy to help coordinate a webinar on that topic.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Do we have anybody within the data group that would like to talk about the data science and harmonization program? Stuff that you're working on there, Wynn?
Yeah, I can do that. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you
for the opportunity.
Erick, it's Rob in San Diego. How are you?
Hey, Rob. Hey, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Anything we can do to help, we're happy to do that. Yeah, I think you know our programs pretty well. We're very, very involved in people experiencing homeless. Some of the regulatory issues associated with that are fascinating. It's something we do every day.
You've been doing some phenomenal work down there, Rob. You've presented before for the Safe to Swim work group. Perhaps we can line up another webinar for your program. I think
happy
that would
to
be
do
really
that.
great.
Yeah, happy to do our. You also know our trash data program, which is many, many years and been pretty successful, I would argue. Happy to talk about that. I would love to see COVID in this discussion somewhere. Maybe it's not timeless, so maybe it's not appropriate for a webinar, but it's certainly something that has affected, I would imagine, everybody in their programs.
I think we're really aware of the topic and the need for information. While trying to put together topics, I just couldn't find a lot out there that I could try to leverage. That may change over the next few months, though.
Well, I think part of it's the adaptation and the pivoting that's been going on.
Yeah.
You know, programs like ours, which are largely volunteer-led, are now switching largely to staff-led, and there's impacts associated with that, of course. And just getting through the process of going on other people's property to pick up trash during a pandemic has been a fascinating process. But it's worthwhile, and maybe there's some lessons we could share or others could share about how to go forward with that.
Right. I think we had a message from Ross Cooper that popped up in chat.
Yeah, it looks like they're looking for partners and participants and interest in holding a collaborative meeting about open source trash data and artificial intelligence.
Yeah, this is Ross. I have to run off, but I just wanted to put that in the chat before I left. Not trying to steal anyone's thunder right now. So just if you guys have a chance to check that out when you have a lull, just let me know if you're interested in joining up on that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. We may call on you. Yeah, within OEMA, there's been some projects over the last few years, talent brought in from some of our Sea Grant fellows about using AI and putting together a program where you can take photographs or take video and then through AI be able to discern what that information is, what that trash item is, categorizing it. So we could probably get them to give a presentation for us as well. That would be expanding it out beyond the basic 6. Shelley, could you bring up that slide again so we could see topics that we still need some presenters for?
Sure. Let me pull it back up. Trying to manage Windows here.
My machine's been running a ton of updates for some reason. It's been pretty wild.
All right,
Okay.
can you see it?
Yeah, I'll reach out to State Board and see who I can get to do the first presentation. I did send some emails out and I got back replies. Folks were on vacation. So Tony, at your shop, you guys have been doing a lot of microplastics monitoring work. Is there somebody there I can chat with?
Absolutely. So the lead on that is Dr. Becky Sutton.
Yeah.
That's Rebecca S at sfei.org. I can shoot this to you, but she would be the main point of contact. But then she has a team of several other scientists who are working on this matter.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks.
We have folks already that with when we could try to get the trash data science and harmonization and leverage OEMA on some of their AI work. Rob, kind of double teaming on community science, as well as some of the unsheltered issues. We have our unsheltered working group, and then Evan, of course, already committed to doing Coastal Cleanup Day. Trash reduction efforts, that may be something we could talk about within trash policy, but we could open it up to something larger. If you are aware of any groups that specifically have some good things that we need to share regarding removal of trash and prevention of trash getting into the environment or moving through the environment.
I think that some groups that may not be on this call could be a good fit for that, like Upstream. They do a lot of work on the prevention side of plastic pollution.
Okay.
And one thing I just wanted to get a little bit of clarity on is when you mentioned the trash policy and actions, do you mean specifically the trash amendments or do you mean broader?
No, broader.
Okay.
Yeah. When we did the presentation on Safe to Swim, we had a representative from Heal the Bay talk about why it's a problem to begin with and what are some of the drivers policy-wise. And it's not just a one little thing. we have the Clean Water Act, we have Port of Cologne, and then within those, we have these other policies and rules like AB 411 and things like that have been driving what we do. And then there's the community input. Without the community at large, as well as the environmental community, a lot of things wouldn't be happening. And within the public health realm, there were a lot of concerns as well. So is bringing all of that to the presentation so that a viewer understands the broader concepts and drivers of why we're doing what we're doing and why we are spending the money and seeking the talent that we need to solve these problems. So not just the trash amendment.
Okay.
I hope that's something that would be agreeable to everybody, that I'm headed in the right direction while trying to find a presenter for that topic. If I'm off, just let me know. This is your working group. I'm just a helper.
Eric, I'll chime in briefly. Caitlin with California Coastkeeper Alliance. I realized I didn't properly introduce myself earlier. On that webinar, or even if it was a spin-off, I think there's so much to discuss here, but the trash amendments, just because there is that 2030 backstop, at least for specific MS4s, it could be, I think, a really pretty robust discussion, or at least a webinar topic, either for a portion of the trash policy action side. I mean, knowing it's not the only action, there's other permits and policies, of course, that tie in, but I think there's a lot, especially as the regional boards are now beginning to actually adopt regional or very municipal specific permits. But then on the state side, you have the Caltrans permit that's coming up, phase 2, and more of these statewide. I think there's just a lot that is really timely, and there's a lot to discuss there.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, doesn't have to be the only topic, but certainly having a designated time for it.
I agree. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, if we can get, possibly 2 presentations on that so that we can get the breadth of participation from the boards, that'd be great. The regional boards have been kind of, historically they've been slow on trash. Yeah. I'm biased because, I've been housed in Los Angeles. We've been doing a lot of trash. Some of the first TMDLs were here. And I did have Erick Wu give a presentation on that trash TMDL. That was years ago. He's moved on. He's with another agency. Same building though, so he's close by. So I'll get to work on trying to round up a bunch of folks for that.
Great.
Hey Eric, this is Gary Conley, Second Nature. One topic that I think it cuts across some of what you have up here already is, especially given these requirements and milestones that cities have to meet trash amendment requirements, is measuring progress towards those goals, right? It sort of cuts across the monitoring and the data science, but using those data in a way to, how do we measure whether or not we're making progress toward the goal and when we get there?
Yeah, I would hope that would be within those policy discussions.
Yeah.
And if they're not, we can always bring those questions up. Yeah, hopefully we have the right people that can answer those.
Sure.
That needs to be part of every program. If we're just spinning our wheels, it doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
It doesn't help the environment. Thank you for your comment. So I got that note written down. Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate your feedback and your volunteering. I'll be following up with everybody.
Sounds great. Thank you, Eric.
You're welcome.
All right. So next on the agenda is some report outs from our subcommittees. We have 3 subcommittees. We have the Citizen Science Subcommittee, the Homeless Encampment Subcommittee, and the Data Subcommittee. Does anybody want to volunteer to go first?
Shelly, I can go.
Oh, okay.
Take it, Win. It's all yours.
Okay. We've been pretty busy on the trash data team. We have a really good group. We have like 10 people who show up pretty consistently right now. It's always a good time. We're recording our meetings too. So if you want to just like geek out about trash data, you know, you want to listen to it like a podcast, that could be fun. I know they're on, Nick has created a YouTube site where they're all being hosted. And so I think since the last time that we met, we've actually accomplished quite a bit. I was just sketching out kind of where we've gone since then. So one of the big things that we had was we were focusing on a trash taxonomy, basically mapping out the relationships between the words that people use to describe trash, which should help to alleviate some of the challenges with merging different trash data sets where people are describing trash using different words, as well as other things, just general interpretation. Oh, what's the website for the podcast? Maybe we could, I know a comment just popped up. Maybe somebody has that link. Yeah, so the trash taxonomy turned into a peer-reviewed publication. We're writing up the manuscript right now. We have about 20 co-authors on that manuscript, and that's moving forward. So we think probably by the end of the year, we'll have that peer-reviewed publication out. There's the online web tool. I'll drop the link. It's trashtaxonomy.shinyapps.io/trashtaxonomy. And yeah, that web tool basically helps you. You can upload your trash data sheets and it'll help you interpret the relationship between your trash data sheet and all the other trash data sheets that are out there that we've included into our database. I just started a new thing called the Trash Data Treasure Trove. I'll drop the link in the chat too for that. Basically, this is an open science framework database that we're going to be, I've already been like curating a bunch of metadata on different trash data sets. One of the things that keeps coming up is like data access. Where's the data? Where do we get it? So this Trash Data Treasure Trove is trying to fix that problem by putting as much data as we know about currently into one location, describing really detailed metadata on it. It's like totally open access, you know, do whatever you want with it. If you want to create another database or put it into your database, great. I think it should be in many places, but we're just trying to do our part and merge that stuff. So I just do it in my free time right now, but also Shelly Moore and Ross Cooper have been helping me with that. So that's been really great. And we have about, I think, like 100 different data sets on there right now, ranging from government groups to citizen science groups to peer-reviewed publications that we find. Pretty much any data set that I find that I'm like, whoa, this is cool, I put on there. So yeah, you can follow me on Twitter. I do like different releases. When_open_data, I've been doing some releases of different data sets and kind of like pitching them to people to use. So outside of those two projects, we've also been working with CDN to try to incorporate trash data into their data portal a little bit better. And so we've been doing quite a bit on that. And Tony and Shelly have been pushing forward trash monitoring method development. And right now we're in like a transitionary period. So, one more thing, Walter Yu and Tony Hale and Gary Conley have been working on trash AI development. So object detection of trash in images. So yeah, we have a lot going on right now, but actually, believe it or not, we're at a transitionary point where we're trying to figure out what our main focus will be for the next quarter. So if you're like, man, I really want the trash data team to start focusing on something that we need help with, let us know. This is a good time to jump in, and we can start to include that into our main topic focus, because now our main topic focus before was the trash taxonomy. Now that's kind of shifted off. We have co-authors on that peer-reviewed publication. That's not really happening much within the group itself, although many of the group members are co-authors on that paper. So yeah, that's the general. If anybody has any questions about what we're up to or how to get involved.
Wynn, before we open it up for questions, can I add a couple points? So this is Tony Hale, and in the work group, in addition to all the great stuff that Wynn has been discussing, we also kind of facing the changes of the world and recognizing the ways that data are not neutral but can be used in various ways once they are interpreted. It was in the context of that discussion that we talked about the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and making sure that this broader work group had some recognition of that. So that bubbled up from our sub work group and eventually made its way into the proposed language for the charter. And so I think it's important to recognize that we were talking about interpreting the data, not just how to standardize the data. And it's in the context of the interpretation of data that we invited Tom Novotny, who is an economist, an emeritus professor down in Southern California, who presented to us on specifically tobacco product waste. And it was great to hear from him because he brought a very holistic viewpoint, looking at impacts of tobacco product waste and also ways that the waste has been measured, some statistics on that, as well then as efforts to intervene and mitigate those impacts. And by impacts, I'm talking about things that are not just geophysical, but recreation, economic, et cetera. So he's looked very carefully at ways to essentially, his advocacy position is to reduce tobacco usage and looking at tobacco product waste as a way to reach that goal. So it was very interesting and a compelling presentation, very far-reaching and holistic in scope. So that is something I mentioned that in particular to people because I could see people in this broader trash work group being very interested in his work. And so you can look at the most recent recording of the Trash Monitoring Work Group Subcommittee, the Data Management Subcommittee, which has been listed by Nick in the chat, and you can see Tom Novotny's presentation.
Great. Does anybody have any questions or input for the data group? No. All right. Well, thank you, Wynn. Thank you, Tony. Great job you guys are doing. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Sherry, did you want to go next?
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. So I'm one of the co-chairs of the Citizen Science Subcommittee. I don't think Aaron, my counterpart, is on the call today. But we had our last meeting back in June, and we talked a lot about the effort, which Wynn kind of referred to, of getting trash data entered into CDIN. And Ross Cooper with the State Water Board gave us a sort of overview of CDIN, which was really helpful because a lot of us just sort of weren't familiar with it. And then Wynn also gave us an update on the Data Management Subcommittee and the effort to get trash data into CDIN, and provided an opportunity for the Citizen Science Subcommittee to review those fields sort of from the citizen science perspective, which was appreciated. And then lastly, we did spend some time kind of talking about COVID impacts on our various citizen science programs and how organizations are adapting. So we haven't met since June, but I reached out to the subcommittee to pitch kind of that we think about reassessing our because it's like, we were sort of spinning our wheels on the concept of adding trash data to CDIN as a way for our citizen science groups to share data with managers. But that effort is, sort of appropriately being spearheaded by the Data Management Subcommittee. So we were hoping to kind of take the opportunity today to get some input from the rest of the work group, but some kind of ideas that have been percolating are creating a new page on the trash monitoring work group Google site with a list of just groups that are doing trash monitoring with citizen scientists, volunteer monitoring in California, and kind of, adding links to their websites and maybe a brief summary of their methods, kind of to serve as like a hub of different citizen science trash monitoring programs and protocols that are actively being used in California. So kind of, I think, different from what Wynn was talking about, a hub for the data, but this would just be a place where people that are interested in trash monitoring can go to kind of learn about what's already being done. Another idea was to compile and share some data-driven case studies or success stories where citizen science data has either influenced policy or been shown, been used to show the impact of some intervention. And then lastly, I don't know if Paula's on the line, but there's some interest in sort of getting a better idea, and I think this is something that continues to come up, of just figuring out what type of trash monitoring data is most useful to decision makers, and then identify data gaps that really could be filled by citizen scientists. So yeah, I just, to reiterate, we are sort of trying to figure out how we can really add value and better support citizen science trash monitoring in California, and are really open to any feedback or ideas. And I think we're hoping to schedule a next meeting to sort of follow up in December. So if anyone on the line does have any ideas or suggestions for us, we'd love to hear those.
Anybody have any burning interest that you want to pose for the citizen science group as far as data to collect and information to provide?
This is Wynn. Sorry, I keep talking, but this is like my favorite time of the year. Honestly, this is my favorite meeting out of all of them. So I'm really excited. Yeah, something that I think about a lot is goals with citizen science groups and how that relates to data. I was just talking with somebody the other day about a group that's just starting up and they want to collect some data while they're doing a trash cleanup. And I asked them, like, is their goal to do science or is their goal to like do education? And I think those goals sometimes can happen together, but then other times really like one of the goals is way more important than the other. And I think that is a huge metadata challenge, like piecing that apart, what that gradient is in data quality due to what the actual priorities are when people are collecting that data. And that's something I would love to see kind of like dug into in the citizen science community, figuring out how to report this metadata. How do I know, like, is the Ocean Conservancy data, is that good quality data? What could I use it for? What are the gremlins that are hiding in the assumptions and biases of the methodology? Like these kind of things kind of keep me up at night sometimes. So I would love to see that.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Wynn. I totally agree. And I wonder if that could be something, thinking about just getting this like hub of who's doing what on the webpage, if that could be sort of a component of that, of, clearly stating the goals and maybe even some like something about sort of the data quality or the rigor or, any protocols that were used in the collection of the trash data.
Yeah, that sounds great, Sherry.
One other point, Sherry, on that topic, integration of citizen science data for regulatory compliance. We have a pretty strong analog in the water quality world, wherein once, as Wynn's talking about there, that the data collection got up to a certain standard and it could be integrated and used for regulatory compliance for cities. If the same thing could be done for citizen science for trash in cities, I think it does two things. It helps us know more about where the trash problems are in the city and can help cities meet their trash compliance requirements. And it's also empowering for volunteers to know that the data that they're collecting is being used for a purpose that can actually change policies in the city that might help the problem.
Great. Are there, Gary, are there any methodologies or sort of, documents that sort of outline that process that you were referring to for the water quality data?
I can dig around and send you what I've got for sort of how that proceeded, how that data got up to the right standard. Yeah.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Hi, this is Rob. I don't know if I can jump in. I don't know if this is a free for all or
it is
that part. Usually somebody else on my team is here, so I apologize if I don't know the culture. We're an example. We're a nonprofit who our data is actually used for regulatory purposes. It is the foundation for a lot of our agencies here, and they rely upon that data. And so again, we would be happy to share that, but we've developed that over, gosh, a decade of collecting data or more. So it is, Gary's comment is really important. The volunteers and our staff, who are professionals, they do love the fact that the public agencies rely upon their data, and it's actually been used in court cases and in different places. And so, but that is a system that was developed by the volunteers, and it fit them. And that's an important thing that I just want to remind people, and you probably already know this, that it also needs to, whatever you do, it needs to fit with the culture of that community group, and it needs to meet their needs as well. So it's kind of a partnership that needs to develop.
Great, thanks, Rob. Yeah, I think the San Diego River Parks, your sort of model and program could be one of those like success stories that we could share for other citizen science groups that are sort of looking to up their game a little bit. So thanks.
One suggestion I want to pose, Sherry, is, and I haven't thought it completely through yet, but we've got this unusual situation happening in the world right now, and I think that citizen science could really do a lot to inform people on how bad the problem is. And I think in some areas that they've already started to do that, and maybe we could start focusing on some of the changes that we might be seeing in trash and trash items due to to COVID. And a lot of attention has been brought to how many masks are being found in the environment now, and maybe we can focus on some of those types of items and use citizen science to inform what the actual extent of the problem is.
Great idea.
Hi, Shelley. It's Jeremiah and everybody. It's Jeremiah at UCSF. I've been photographing masks as I'm out photographing tobacco product waste. I can tell you it's a pretty shocking problem of biohazard out there. So that's, I think, a really interesting topic to pursue. And also, just a note that I've been corrected by, in kind of following with the proposed changes in the charter on social and racial justice. I've been corrected for using the term citizen science because that has some political implications for people personally. And so I just want to throw it out there that folks have encouraged me to use community member science because it's inclusive and doesn't exclude folks who are undocumented.
Yeah, Jeremiah, thank you so much for that comment. We actually, back kind of in I think it was in early 2020, we talked a lot about that and actually took it to a vote among the subcommittee of whether we wanted to rename ourselves to community science, and citizen science won out by like 1 or 2 votes, I think. So it might, in light of sort of everything that's going on, it might be a good idea to reconsider that, because I don't know if some folks might have voted differently if we had it a couple months later.
Thanks for bringing that up. All right, any other comments or questions for Sherry? All right, we've got one group left, and that is the homeless encampment group. I think, Caitlin, you are up for making that presentation.
Yeah, just a really quick update. This year, I mean, especially, I think everyone was facing this with COVID kind of transitioning, having workloads shift as well as availability and staff. So this last year, we kind of hit the ground running. I was just kind of thinking the year broken up by quarters. As COVID was hitting, we're in the second quarter, and we were able to turn both to the subcommittee, and then really a big thank you to Nick and Ross and all the State Water Board staff on helping us shape and finalize what we're calling part one of a two-part survey that was created by our subcommittee. But part two is still in development, but having part one really kind of fine-tuned, and actually we were able to release it to MS4 dischargers, is very specific to municipal groups on what data exists about trash and those experiencing homelessness. It's specifically encampments, which is why we have, we're titled the Homeless Encampment Subcommittee. I know there's a lot of sensitivities with the term, homeless. So I mean, we may revisit, that can be maybe a topic for our next committee meeting, whether it is simply just encampment subcommittee or along those lines, but it is targeting the trash generated and produced, and then how is it monitored, how is it tracked, how is it managed. And it's, so again, we're trying to make sure that the information we're collecting as a subcommittee is very data specific. It's not policy driven. We're not looking to necessarily interfere with the trash amendments or influence policies on that level. Really is, right now it's collecting that baseline data. And what we're doing, so we have that part one. Again, thank you to Nick and Ross for helping us get that distributed this fall. Is then our next step is hopefully having a committee meeting first couple weeks of January. Dahlia, my co-chair, is currently out of the country, so I can't promise having a faster next step meeting, but on the back end, I can say we're kind of teeing up the next steps for both the part two survey for 2021, getting the subcommittee together early in the year so we can vet as well as vet a research proposal, maybe looking at UC Riverside, Sacramento State, others who are very engaged in this trash data collection sphere, to have a graduate student that help us with the part two survey, which is then following up with those MS4s that completed part one and getting a little more drilling into the details of the data, finding out, is it collected by volume, all these different metrics that are used to actually quantify and track and monitor, and how, and just understanding a little more about kind of the lay of the land and how everyone's managing this particular source of trash. And from that, another goal of our committee really is to pull together different approaches to this. I mean, it's a challenging issue and it's very sensitive, and what may work in a more rural community in Northern California is not necessarily what's going to work in, let's say, Orange County, and being able to understand and tease out those differences. And so we were interested in having some sort of speaker series. And so I was really, really glad to hear about Erick's webinar process, since that's one where we may be able to plug in, as well as maybe build out as far as how different municipalities are approaching this issue, how maybe that's changed because of COVID. What does the landscape look like? What were people starting before the pandemic hit, and how does that look now? And yeah, just really getting a real lay of the land as far as what approaches different municipalities are taking, and as well as citizen and NGOs. And I mean, there's so many groups. It's a really collaborative issue and challenge that as a society we're facing. So understanding who's partnering with who, and maybe getting some presentations in 2021. So I think my biggest flag is we're slowly but surely, moving forward, and we look forward to bringing the subcommittee together to really kind of have a 2021 maybe mini work plan, if you will, in early January.
Great, thanks, Caitlin. Are there any questions or comments for Caitlin? I have a question. What have you guys, I'm assuming, have talked about what to call your subcommittee? What are some of the terms that have come up? And I'm wondering if we can get some feedback from the group, because I'm not up to date on any of that stuff.
Yeah, I'm trying to think back. I apologize. I could go back to my notes from our first subcommittee meeting. I think we touched on it briefly, but it becomes really challenging because it's, those experiencing homelessness, this term unsheltered, because we really are looking at encampments. I think that's for just for internals. I hate to say simplicity, but as far as without having a title that is over 5 words long, something along those lines, but still being able to get to the heart of what we're looking at. So I don't know if honestly, I don't think we had a really big, robust conversation on that piece. I think it's something we should revisit for 2021, but trying again, how to make it as simple as possible.
Does anybody have any comments or feedback on that or anything else?
We are all ears. So if you have additional ideas, please feel free to, email me. I can put my email in the chat.
Awesome.
Hi, this is Shelley Walther. I actually have a comment on that. Here in LA County, we had Measure J that just passed, and there are a lot of conversations around that. And the terms that the advocates for the quote unquote homeless use is unsheltered or unhoused. Unhoused is the one that I come up with. And it's actually it's shorter than homelessness. So, that would be, if you're worried about the length, that would help.
I really appreciate that. Thank you.
I would recommend just interfacing with those advocates that are working on the problem, because that would be a really great collaboration, and you'd be in sync with the terminology.
Excellent. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
This is Rob. If I can jump in San Diego, even the term house or home is a sensitive term, because for the folks experiencing life along a riverbed, that is their home or house. And so we don't even use that term anymore. So I think, gosh, it's quite a challenge to come up with a phrase that means something to the people you're trying to impact. We don't use the term encampment anymore, as an example, because a lot of people envision an encampment as a tent or a structure. And often, as I think all of you know, that's not what we're talking about. So I think we're all struggling on words. So if you can figure it out, please share. That would be very helpful.
Rob,
and Rob's point, I mean, that's why we need to interface with people working on with the people and on the issue of trying to help the situation directly, rather than just trash people.
Absolutely. Water quality. And that's definitely, I'll say, our organization is very much a water quality based organization. So I know it's a challenge. Rob, is there a term you use in the interim?
No, we bounce all over the place, just like many people, depending on your audience, you use a different term, perhaps. We do not use the term homeless anymore. That's for certain. People experiencing homeless, that's more of the term we are kind of around, which begins that issue of it's awfully a lengthy term then. But encampments, we have learned in our surveys that is a word that people immediately have a vision of what it is, and that's not what we're talking about usually when we're trying to help people that are living in riverbeds. So it's a struggle.
And I think, I appreciate that too, because I think, I'm trying to think of how we could, definitely needs to be an agenda item, but I also really appreciate the suggestion of, connecting with those. Maybe that can be, whether inviting them to the subcommittee meeting to, have a larger group discussion, I think would be great. At first, organizations that first come to mind, there's just so many. But we do have a connection with Downtown Streets team, things like that. So if others have ideas of, maybe individuals or organizations you think would be good to, bring into this conversation, my email's in the chat.
Another term that I've heard is people living rough outdoors.
Well, thanks. All right. Well, thank you, Caitlin. And so I wanted to thank our subcommittee chairs, Wynn, Tony, Sherry, and Caitlin for giving us an update. And I want to let the rest of you guys know that if you have any interested or if you have any interest in participating in any of these subcommittees, please let us know and we can hook you up with the chairs of those committees. They typically are meeting right now, I believe, on a quarterly basis, and that may change given what's going on. But we'd love to have you participate in those subcommittees and voice your comments, your interest, your whatever you have that interests you in participating in that particular subgroup. So we're right on schedule. What I'd like to do is pass it back over to Christine to introduce our speaker. We've actually, as part of this group, we've had a lot of people voice their interest in hearing what other people are doing, not just in California, but also throughout the world and in other states too. So we've got some really interesting guest speakers for today. And Christine, if you want to introduce the first one, that would be great.
Sure. So next we're going to be hearing from Julian Fulton from Cal State Sacramento. So not worldwide yet. We're still in California. But he wanted to introduce us today to an exciting new project. It's an EPA funded project that Sac State has that they're calling the Trash Rapid Assessment Data Exchange, or TRADE. I won't go into too many details because I'm sure Julian wants to do that. We just need to make sure he can share his screen because he has some slides he was going to share with us today.
Yeah, he should be able to.
It says it's ready, disabled Julian? Right now. So you may need to hit that little up arrow down at the bottom. Here we go. Now it's, yep. Yeah, let's see. How's that?
Looks like it's starting. Yep, perfect.
Great. Great. Well, thank you, Christine and Shelley, for allowing me to present today. Yeah, this is, and I think we have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to try to present our project for about 10 and then get some feedback. So I'm totally new to trash. I have to just admit that. And this has been a super exciting morning so far because I've just been learning a ton. And I just, you know, as Erick said, trash is cool. And I just keep everything I learn about it just makes it seem more and more cool. So I'm super excited. And you know, my background is in more water resources. So I am familiar with, you know, a lot of the other work of the water board and other stuff in California with watersheds. But in talking with colleagues at Sac State, and some of you may know, some of Christine and Brian are both on this project. I just became really fascinated with the situation around trash, and tried to bring some experience with computer science that I've worked with Ying Jing, our other collaborator, on a previous Exchange Network grant, and to bring some of that expertise to bear on the issue of stormwater and trash. So I'll talk a little bit about the project and how it came about, and then what we're planning to do, because it's really just getting going. And I'm happy to try and connect with some of you at this early stage to shape our thinking going forward. And so I know the Exchange Network grant program has funded some previous Cal EPA projects and other state agency projects. And so some of you might be familiar with it, but it's a federal program focused around data exchange and, from our perspective, data visualization. So our previous projects really developed from a lot of disparate data sources, a visualization and display that was on water use in the power sector. So how power plants use water is kind of different subject, but that's sort of the perspective that the data science side of it is what we're sort of trying to connect now with some impressive stormwater expertise that we have at Sac State, and in connecting to other groups. So this is a California focused project, but we do recognize that we're trying to create a model for other states and other jurisdictions around the country. So holding that in mind, the way that we kind of see the picture in California, and this is really hyperbolic, I should probably say, but you know, on the right side, you see the sort of people power, the community science. And we do a lot of that right at Sac State. We have trash cleanups in the American River. We're right next to the American River, and throughout the watershed, we have a lot of great partnerships, and I'll mention some of those. But you know, learning about the regulatory side of this, the relationship and the duty of permittees to meet the trash amendments and their reporting and monitoring needs. So that's what we're really focusing on, and we see this. You know, it's not a chasm, but it's an opportunity really to build some tools that help connect community science and the people power that's been talked about in those last subcommittee discussions to the actual monitoring and reporting needs of the MS4 permittees. So what we're looking to do is to create kind of an open door database where using apps or whatever kind of tabulation data collection methods happen associated with cleanups and community science, is to work with what's happening now with the data methodology and harmonization efforts, and try to create sort of an open door database that community groups across the state, really in lots of different situations at the local level, contribute that data to a centralized location where it can be processed and displayed in ways that really target the needs of MS4 permittees. So that's really our goal, is to do this sort of translation process and put some more infrastructure in place for that to happen. And I know that sort of dovetails with a lot of the stuff that I've been hearing about this morning. So I'm super excited to work with you on this. So our goals, number one, is to really support the needs of MS4 permittees, their reporting and monitoring needs, so they can sort of work on their programming, their on-the-ground programming. So we want to build a data exchange platform that really engages citizen or community science, as Jeremiah pointed us towards a few minutes ago, trash assessments that coincide with those community-based organization work, and actually contribute that data in ways that is formatted in a consistent and usable way for permittees. Third is the sort of translation step and visualizing that and presenting that in ways through a dashboard or a website that actually support the specific needs of permittees, whatever those might be, and recognizing that those are very contextual and specific. So that's sort of where we're heading, or what we want to do. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning, to create kind of a model for how this platform, this set of tools, can be kind of replicated in other states and regulatory contexts. Because we do hope that trash amendments, that trash monitoring and cleaning up our waters toward trash-free waters is something that is replicating around the country and the world. So what Sac State is kind of bringing to this in this project, first of all, we are an MS4 permittee, and that's, you know, as I mentioned, we're right on the American River, and that's created actually a lot of interesting opportunities for our students and our what we do as a university to get students out doing community science, learning these methods, and working with the community, really engaging with the community throughout the watershed. And it's kind of this experiential learning process in environmental studies and other departments. A lot of interesting collaboratives have developed out of that, with the American River Parkway Foundation, with the Regional Water Authority, which is really a basin-wide initiative. Keep California Beautiful, that's Christine Flowers, that is, I think she's on this call now, and has done a lot of work in this area over the years. And Valley Foothill Watersheds Collaborative, so lots of sort of regional connections that have developed the science and the collaborative kind of outreach efforts that we've done. And then within Sac State, we also have the Office of Water Programs, which has done a lot of state agency work and also work with cities and the stormwater permitting community on research issues around best management practices, low impact development research and science, and then a whole range of sort of planning and project feasibility, cost benefit analysis stuff. They have a lot of online tools that support stormwater planning and management. And they also host the federal EPA's Region 9 Environmental Finance Center, which is a kind of hub of technical expertise and technical assistance and financing targeted to small and disadvantaged communities. So a great kind of mechanism to help sort of disseminate these tools to municipalities and, from our perspective, permittees around the country. Around the state at least. So next steps, we want to start coordinating with all the work that I've been learning about, and figure out how we can sort of fit in and support all this great work that's being coordinated through this work group, especially on the kind of the subcommittee work, the harmonization work with the data methodology. And we also have funding to actually work with 6 MS4 permittees around California. So we want to figure out who that will be and sort of lead us through what their needs are and have it really be driven by the needs of the permittees and the sort of specific localized contextual needs, right? That not trying to force out upon any particular vision. And then because this is going to be like an IT platform, a database, a website, looking for a long-term host that makes this a sustainable model for California and a sustainable tool for California. So I've been, hearing about CDN and maybe other groups that might want to host this long-term. Our timeline runs through September 2023, so we have about 3 years to run this project, and are really planning to ramp up in the spring. So I wanted to just sort of introduce this and get any feedback at this stage, and really just to start following up with people. Here's my contact info, and I'd be really excited to hear your ideas and comments and to connect with you all in the future. So thank you.
Great, thank you. Are there any questions for Julian?
Julian, this is Tony. Beyond 2023, the end date for your project, would you hope to re-up the funding through different mechanisms so that you could continue with your the kind of data collection efforts? Or would you instead hope that you're absorbed into something like CDN, as you point out, is something very durable?
Yeah, that's something we found with this funding mechanism, is that it is sort of project specific, and so yeah, we would hope to be absorbed, that our project could be absorbed by and have some kind of longer term funding mechanism, which would hopefully be pretty minimal, but all the work, most of the work is going to be on the front end of building the system. So,
and at Sac State, just a quick follow up on that. At Sac State, do you have a record of continuing a project after the first round of funding ends? Is there a normal process that you pursue for adoption of these tools? The reason why I ask is because sometimes the roadmap and the future expectation of what will happen afterwards can dictate how people engage with you on the front end, because they want to know how durable this is going to be if they're going to put in the work on to work with you on this. Is it going to go anywhere, or is it just going to be a kind of like a cul-de-sac that ends and then never continues on?
Right. Yeah, that's an excellent point. And the Office of Water Programs is sort of a tool warehouse in a lot of ways, but they don't have the resources to just commit to taking it on right now. So yeah, that will be part of our our ongoing process is to look for those long-term funding sources, and recognizing that it's not free to keep these kinds of tools running, but really. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to kind of do this early outreach and see if this is something that this community or either the state or any of the other groups here might want to host this, or have suggestions on where it could be hosted and how it could be funded in the long term.
Tony, this is Christine and Julian. One of the things we're also trying, we're going to try to work with 6 communities under a separate grant here in the American River Basin. And as we're working through that over a 2 to 3 year period, it's through a separate project. The data will fill in, and then this idea that we can get 6 other communities throughout the state, permittees in different capacities, very urban, rural, so that we can see how this is going to work to get the citizen groups to use it and move forward. And then the integration part is where Julian comes in. So my perspective and dealing with it with students and interns and community groups is to start getting them using the tools that we've already developed over the past 2 to 3 years that they're familiar with, and hopefully move forward. But as Julian said, we can do this, but we have to figure out how to keep managing it long term, because the nonprofits just can't host it by themselves. So that's where we're hoping that making it valuable to the permittees, that we can figure out a way to do that.
I think all that sounds great, and I applaud your efforts to do this. I think it's going to be very, very valuable. My one suggestion would be to invest time in pursuing automation, meaning to script as much as you can, not with the idea that it removes all cost, but that it will ideally eliminate the need for kind of just constant care and feeding that can often be the bottleneck if you have to pay for several staff members ad infinitum to kind of tend to this system. Whereas if you script it, it might need adjustment over time, and it needs technical expertise, and it needs, of course, support from the systems, but it's much less burdensome than if you have to kind of have these human-centered processes for integrating data over time. So that would be one suggestion.
If I could,
thank you. Oh, please.
If I could add on to that from Tony, I think one way of doing that would be to make the source code open access. Often, if you have like a really big data portal that's being used by a lot of people like me who like to spend their free time devoting to developing open access projects will be really excited to contribute to that. And so that can be another way to increase the longevity of this project, as well as make it more transparent and make it more useful. Some of your other objectives about having this be like a framework that is then adopted by other groups and kind of catered to a new goal. I think making it open source would really help you to achieve that goal as well. And then one last thing, I think it would be great if I'll try to convince you to join the trash data team, because I think there's a lot of synergy between your goals and what we're currently working on. I can think of, we already have tens of data sets that you could use to start populating your database and your map, for example. We already have taxonomies that you can incorporate into your database so that you can feed all the data in and actually interpret it. So there's like lots of things like that. I would love, it's like a once a month, 1 hour meeting, and you can every time like update us on your project and get feedback from us. And I think you'll get a lot of contribution from the group on that to help you achieve your goals.
Great, thank you both for those comments. And I see a common issue, which is trying to make our platform, as I mentioned, like the kind of open door approach, like have it be able to receive information from groups that are doing assessments and have that be in a sort of standardized way so that you don't have to have humans constantly interpreting it and cleaning it and formatting it. And so, you know, the balance between that model and kind of allowing for flexibility among the community groups, I think will be the tricky part. But yeah, I definitely want to join the trash data team and continue to work with y'all.
And when I haven't been on the calls lately with the trash data team, I had to take some medical leave for kind of the last 5-6 months. So I've been doing very limited, but we are using the information that I shared with you guys early on, the nomenclature that we're using. I can resend that. I think it was probably, I did that before we went into kind of the COVID issue. So I'll make sure that you guys see that. And yeah, we need to get Julian involved as well. So I'm kind of coming back into work full time just in the past week or so.
Cool. I'll send you both the invite to the group.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Julian. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Michelle Kokolis. She is a program manager from the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. She initially reached out to Christine and I because she's been working on a project that involves 10 years of analyzing trash monitoring data. And most of the work she's been doing revolves around trash in the Anacostia River, and they've been looking to see if they need to change their protocols and or become more aware of other things that are going on. So she reached out and we asked her to speak. And so Michelle, you are up, and you're going to be tag teaming with Aubin, correct?
Correct.
All right, it's your show.
All right, so does everyone see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay, great. So we have a lot to get through. I'm going to zip through some of it. I'm going to be talking about the main bones of the project and the background of the TMDL here in the Anacostia, and then Aubin is going to talk specifically about the protocol that's being used. So that's what I just said. We're going to talk about the history of trash in the river, where we are today, the monitoring protocol, and then sort of a summary of the current project that we're working on. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the Anacostia, it's relatively small, 176 square miles. The river itself is 8.4 miles long. We are located in the heart of the District of Columbia, Prince George's County, and Montgomery counties in Maryland. And as I'm sure you can guess, we are highly urbanized. The Anacostia is also one of 19 federal urban waters. And historically, the Anacostia is very polluted, not just with trash, but also with other contaminants and PCBs and things like that. So it's a river that has some issues. And right now, over 25% of the watershed is impervious surface. And there's over 1 million people that live in the Anacostia watershed. So trash in the Anacostia there's a long history. If we go way back to 1987, the Anacostia Watershed Agreement and the formation of the Anacostia Watershed Restoration Committee really kicked off a lot of the restoration activities that are going on here. In 1991, they developed a priority to develop a comprehensive trash and floatables reduction strategy for the river and its tributaries. And it needed to be something that included an actual demonstration of a promising trash reduction system. And they wanted to accomplish that by 2020. In 2005, the Anacostia Trash Reduction Workgroup was formed. In 2007, the Anacostia Watershed Trash Reduction Strategy came about, which was followed by the Anacostia River Trash TMDL in 2010. In 2016, the National Resources Defense Council sued the EPA over the trash TMDL. And in 2018, the TMDL was vacated with the stipulation that the EPA either needed to develop a new TMDL or a replacement TMDL. So just to give you an idea of how we define trash, here trash is defined as all improperly discarded waste material, including but not limited to convenience food, beverage, and other product packages or containers that are constructed of steel, aluminum, glass, paper, plastic, and other natural and synthetic materials that are thrown or deposited on the land or water. So pretty much everything. The Anacostia trash TMDL, as I said, was came about in August of 2010. It's the second trash TMDL in the nation and the first multi-jurisdictional interstate trash TMDL. And there are some specific ways that this TMDL is different. As I'm sure you know, there's no numerical water quality criteria for trash. So it's not actually set as a maximum load that can enter the water body. This trash TMDL is written in the terms of the negative. So how much trash must be removed or prevented from entering the water body. So for the Anacostia, the trash TMDL target is 100% removal or capture of the baseline. So how did we get to the baseline? The baseline is the annual trash load that was calculated from storm drains, the combined sewer overflow or outfalls, and in-stream trash monitoring data. And so theoretically, the baseline represents the typical annual load. So in this case, our WLA, our waste load allocation, is equal to the point sources. The load allocation is the non-point source trash. So they did in-stream and stormwater outfall monitoring to determine the NPS baseline loads respectively. And then importantly for this presentation and the monitoring methods that we're going to talk about, we're only dealing with the portion of the baseline load that's associated with the 3 jurisdictions in the Anacostia. There are a lot of entities that have to meet requirements like State Highway Administration, parks, and all sorts of places. But this project focuses specifically around what the 3 jurisdictions are required to do. So in the MS4 permit for all 3 jurisdictions, trash is identified as a priority pollutant, meaning their MS4 permits require trash monitoring. That monitoring also says that they have to differentiate between the MS4 or the point source and the non-MS4 or the non-point source items. The MS4 permits only require the jurisdictions to account for the point source reduction. So this table that you see here is what is considered to be an MS4 item within the trash TMDL. So a lot of the things that we typically think about and a lot of things that are now legislated like plastic bags and styrofoam. The non-MS4 items are all of the things you see in this table. And so when they made this differentiation in establishing the non-point source baseline loading rate, only the items that are generally considered too large to move through the storm sewer system were counted. If you look at this list, you can, I'm sure, see that there are some issues with some of these things because there definitely are non-MS4 items that do travel through the storm drains, through small storm drains, as well as large storm drains. So I wanted to give you an idea of what the baseline looks like and what the jurisdictions here are actually required to do. So for the phase 1 MS4s, the 3 jurisdictions I mentioned, these are their annual required reductions through the TMDL. So the District of Columbia is 103,000 pounds a year and change, Montgomery County 228 and change, and Prince George's County 170. And then this table below shows what their benchmark goals were for 2015 through 2025. And then the ones that are marked with an asterisk are the jurisdictions that are actually meeting those goals. So you'll see the only one with an asterisk is the District of Columbia. They have been meeting their goal since, I believe, 2016, if not just 2017. As of 2019, when they did their MS4 reporting, the district was exceeding the baseline by about 30,000 pounds per year. Montgomery County is not doing very well with their reductions. They're currently only removing 16,000 pounds of trash per year that they are accounting for. And then Prince George's County, as of 2019, was removing about 118,000 pounds per year. So they're close, but they're not quite there yet. And a lot of those differences are due to the activities that the jurisdictions take credit for and how they report those things. And so that's one of the things we're looking at with this project, is also why are these three jurisdictions doing things so differently? And does that need to change? Which gets us to the monitoring protocol. So the protocol, which Aubin's going to talk about, is all the trash monitoring for the TMDL for all three jurisdictions is conducted by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And so they collect data multiple times a year for Prince George's County, Montgomery County, and Washington, D.C. Aubin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here. Good afternoon, morning, everybody. Just for a little background that I have to say that I'm from the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. And so we're basically a regional planning office, or COG, that work in the District of Columbia, suburban Maryland, and Northern Virginia, and represented by a whole slew of people. Next slide. I just want to point out that you'll probably notice, right, that there's removal that the counties are responsible for, and then they also are doing monitoring. So I'm going to talk about the monitoring. And just for time's sake, I'm going to kind of skip over some of the history, but COG was worked with the counties, the jurisdictions, the state of DC, and NGOs to develop this monitoring protocol for the TMDL. And then we conducted much of the initial baseline monitoring. Next slide. What is trash? Here are some of the more fun things we found. But I want to point out that the working group set a size limit to trash of 1 inch diameter, basically a bottle cap. But that can be an important point to note. Next slide. The work group developed and agreed upon a trash survey, and we'll get into this more, that broke up litter into 20 basic categories. Next slide. So currently we sample twice a year, 37 sites. Of those 37, there are also kind of embedded in 16 pick sites. The monitoring sites are 500 feet long. And in those 500 feet, we first walk the stream, and anything in the wetted perimeter, we count. And that's a visual count. So we don't look under things, we don't dig. We also note strainers, which we'll talk about. Then those 16 pick sites, of those 37, we pick all the trash that we can find in the top 250. And that trash is classified, counted, weighed. Just also, it's worth noting that we do have basic criteria when we go out. Streams have to be wadeable, clear water. We do not remove large items, so those non-MS4 items we tend not to remove. Next slide. So we often get, you might be wondering about where our sites are within the watershed. So they're located within each of the jurisdictions that we have here. You can see the sites with the circles are the sites that we collect and weigh trash as well. And these sites were selected based on several criteria. First off, we have a biological stream network monitoring network that was used for a long time. And so each county was broken up by those, and then they were distributed along first, second order streams. Next slide. This is just Montgomery County. These are the same sites that were used to develop the trash TMDL. So all of these were monitored for that as well. Next slide. The District of Columbia is a little different. They select their sites in the non-combined sewer. We have a combined sewer and then a non-combined sewer. And so these are in the non-combined areas. Some of the sites where you'll see here, if you can see my pointer, were selected also because they're above and below certain in-stream band-along trash traps. So they're also trying to get data on whether those are removed. Next slide. So here's our categories, the 20 categories, and we can supply the data sheet if that's of interest later. And next slide. Yes, hard to see. Each category has very specific descriptions of what falls into them, and we'll just take a look at one. Next slide. We'll check out plastic bags just for today. Go ahead and the next one, slide. So we have plastic bag fees. They were not banned at the time. So through within the last 10 years, various jurisdictions implemented bag fees. So at first we just counted plastic bags, but then those were broken up into carryout and then other. It's worth noting that if, lots of bags are shredded out there. So those tend to fall in the other category if we can't tell that they're shopping bags. Next slide. So we've been monitoring for over 10 or about 10 years, and there are several issues or red flags within our sampling protocol, and that's why we hired EFC to kind of look at the data from a different perspective. Strainers, which were just things in the stream, they could be shopping carts in a very small stream or a huge tree across the stream. But when strainers appear in our sites, as you know, you can get these trash dams, and that can really affect the data. At first, we just noted presence or absence in numbers, but we began noting that some of these smaller ones are worth noting as a minor strainer, and it would have been great to be able to parse the data out with that. We also noticed that, a roughness coefficient might be needed for each site because a trapezoidal cement channel will not have any trash, even in a very dirty area or area that produces a lot of litter. And then an area with lots of plants and trees and beautiful stream might collect a lot of trash. So that is another issue we're looking into. Next slide. This is just for interest, if you're wondering what it's like on our side of the world, the country. This is the overall for all time through all of our sites, just as what we find for percent of trash by count, not weight. I will note this is unofficial, but I just looked at the data just now, and our average count for medical waste, which would be PPE, masks, gloves, is about 0.3% of all trash found over the whole time. In the spring of last year, it was up to 3% of all trash found was PPE. Now that's unofficial. I think that we still have to run QA/QC on the data. So that's what we're finding. Next slide. Go ahead, Michelle.
So to bring you up to date with where we are now, as I said, in 2018, the TMDL was challenged. There's an ongoing lawsuit against the EPA. So they haven't, last I spoke with them, they have not made a whole lot of progress in knowing what the new TMDL is going to look like. In the spring of 2020, COG contracted with the Environmental Finance Center to analyze the monitoring data and to generate recommendations about the protocol. I'll also say that I used to work at COG, so I have a bit of history with this project. And so we right now, we got a little bit of a late start, like most people did because of COVID. So this project was actually supposed to be wrapping in December. We have extended through February. So right now we're done with most of the analysis. Through meeting with the jurisdictions, there were some questions that came up and some additional things that they would like us to look at. So we are still working through that process. We have contracted specifically with a company called Rotunda Solutions to do the data analysis. And part of the reason that we are using them is because they are not an environmental firm per se. And so they bring a very non-biased view to the analysis that they are doing, which has been enlightening for me because they think of things that I would never think of when looking at the data because they don't have a history or background with trash monitoring. I can tell you that like some of the recommendations that we are considering and things that we are thinking about and questions that have come up have been largely related to legislated items. As Aubin said, the protocol was not originally developed to monitor whether or not legislation is having an impact on trash. So it wasn't designed to specifically monitor if a bag bill is impacting the number of bags that we see, or same thing with styrofoam and now also straws. And so we're looking at that because the data is not necessarily showing what the jurisdictions would hope to see with regard to that. Not to say that the legislation isn't working, but just saying that perhaps this protocol is not working for the information they are looking to find. So right method for the right question. Depending on the timeline and how our results line up with where the EPA is in the development of the new TMDL, the results of this analysis may or may not play into what the new TMDL looks like. So that's sort of where we are today. And then we're happy to take any questions.
I see a couple of questions in the chat, and I'll just go ahead and jump on one of those. So yes, there's a lot of trash that's under 1 inch. And when developing this, that was a huge sticking point with a lot of people. I mean, I think the work groups talked for months about that. That came down to one of the analysis to develop the baseline was catching all trash coming out of outfalls. And we could not, there was no way to, the committee could not come up with a way to measure those. Everything would just get blown out, like devices that were used to catch trash were blown out. And so it was very hard to develop a sampling protocol that would include things of that lower limit. And yes, microplastics is a huge problem. And I think that a separate protocol would need to be developed to monitor that. Michelle, they asked you, will tobacco products eventually be added to the list you've presented?
Perhaps. We haven't, I'm still waiting on final results from the data folks to really get into the recommendations a lot, but I think that there certainly is value in looking at tobacco products. I know, Shelley, one of the things you had asked me was if they were seeing an increase in vaping products since the vaping craze took off. And so we probably will have a recommendation related to that. But it's also, depending on the type of tobacco product, and Aubin, I'm sure you can speak to this, like it's challenging sometimes to see what you're going to see in a stream, right? Like heavier things like vaping products would be more popular, more common than cigarette butts. So, but yeah, something we are thinking about.
So interestingly, anecdotally, excuse me, man, I can speak today. We have not, well, we see vaping products. I would say that our teams have not, this question has been asked, our teams have not seen like a substantial increase. And sometimes it's hard to tell the difference though, in the streams.
I'll also say to the question about microplastics, there are some people out here who are very interested in microplastics, but I agree with what Aubin said about the fact that microplastics needs to be separate from this protocol specifically that we're talking about. And so one of the reasons that I was so interested in what you all are doing is because it's hard to find people who are doing long-term trash monitoring, and then to discover that 2 of the protocols that you are using are sort of combined into the one that we are using. So I would be interested in whether or not there's any comments or thoughts about, you know, what we're doing, and specifically like the question of a visual assessment versus the pick and the weigh and things like that.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, you guys. Great job. Are there any questions or comments for Michelle or Aubin?
Hi, this is Shelley Walther. I just wanted to thank you for your presentation and say that I wasn't suggesting that you have a inclusive monitoring that included microplastics, but rather just in your definition that you don't have a gap between the two. So if you do have a definition for microplastics, that wherever it ends, that's where your trash should begin.
Good point.
Yeah, I think you have it seems like you have a gap, because I can't imagine that you're defining microplastics as just below 1 inch, you know, going up to 1 inch.
That's a good point. And I think that part of the reason for that is probably the fact that the definition was developed many, many, many years before microplastics were on anybody's mind. But that's an excellent point.
Yeah, that actually is a really excellent point. Thank you for sharing that or pointing that out.
Any other questions?
I see something about hazardous materials. So yeah, you know, I think all of our teams that when we're out in the streams, we're all fish and bug and environmentalists. So we do our best to remove nasty stuff from the stream when we can. The sites where we just count because as you know, the funds for monitoring trash are not always big, and so we have a lot of ground to cover between sites. So we remove all the trash and properly dispose of it in those pick sites, but we don't remove all the trash, and I wish we could. But
I know that this is when I know that Tim Julian at the University of Chicago Loyola is working on trying to calibrate the difference between those visual trash assessments and the ones where you pick things up. And he found some pretty strong correlations that you can use to correct between those 2 methodologies. That might be helpful. Another piece of information.
What was the name again?
Timothy Julian. I can I'll drop it in the chat.
Thanks.
A link to his profile. Another thing that's that you brought up that's really interesting is the roughness coefficient. I intuitively agree with you that the stream roughness should correlate with how much trash there is in the stream. They've been investigating that at Squirt here in Southern California. I don't know, it might be different here. But here, because where there's concreted channels, it's also like highly urbanized, densely populated areas. They're still finding more trash in those channels, even though they have smooth surfaces, than in channels where you know, they have lots of vegetation and stuff. So it would be interesting to see when you add in your roughness coefficient, if you see something different up there. I just want to give you that kind of preliminary. Those are 2 preliminary data sets that I know of that are related to things you brought up.
That is really interesting. I think we have a lot fewer fewer cement channels where we are.
Yeah, I can believe that.
I'll
Thank
also
you.
say that we're really interested in some of the things you're talking about related to citizen science as well. We have some groups in the area here that have been trained to use the same protocol. And so one of the things we're considering with our recommendations is whether or not, in order to get more data, should we expand and start using trained volunteers more? So that conversation is very interesting to us as well.
Great. Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to continuing the conversation with you.
And Shelley, I'll send you my slides. I know I didn't do that in advance, so I'll send you the presentation. And when we get our final report done, I'll forward that along to you as well.
Great, thank you. And I saw your comment in the chat about wanting to participate in the webinar series, and I'll make sure you get that info as well. So
excellent, thank you.
All right, thank you for your presentation, you guys. Much appreciated. All right, let me go ahead and turn this over to Christine to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. So we've got one more presentation here from another California group on the ocean litter strategy, another great coordination opportunity. And as a brief introduction, I just wanted to say that the ocean litter strategy hosted a series of 6 work group meetings in September. And during those meetings, the question came up a little bit about collaboration with the trash monitoring work group, or how the groups were working together. So Sherry Lippiatt and Tanya Torres from the NOAA Marine Debris Program and Holly Wyer from California Ocean Protection Council are here today to fill us in on what's going on with the ocean litter strategy and talk a little bit about how that work and our work can mesh. So thanks for joining us today.
Great, thanks, Christine. So I'm gonna kind of run through these slides, but we'll rely on Tanya Torres, the California Sea Grant Fellow from the NOAA Marine Debris Program, and Holly Wyer with the Ocean Protection Council to kind of jump in case I get anything wrong, or if there's questions that I can't answer. So yeah, again, the ocean litter strategy is an effort that's co-led by NOAA and the Ocean Protection Council. And as sort of alluded to, this is one of a number of different marine debris, marine litter, plastic pollution, trash initiatives that have popped up in California in recent years, which is great because there's a lot of new interest in the topic, and different efforts, are recognizing the need for more coordination. But we want to make sure that all of that coordination isn't happening in silos, and that the efforts are complementing each other. So next slide, please. All right, so sorry if this map is triggering any post-traumatic election stress. I'm not here to talk about the election, but this is a map of states in green where NOAA has facilitated the development of marine debris action plans. So the topic of marine debris is really broad and complex, and varies geographically. So the NOAA Marine Debris Program has 10 regional coordinators like myself who are tasked with identifying priorities and supporting regional stakeholders. So we recognize the need for some kind of formal process to coordinate and communicate work being done in the regions. And we initiated this regional marine debris action planning process. So typically these plans are developed through a series of workshops to identify shared goals and actions, and then those are published in a plan that has a set timeline for implementation. They serve as sort of a work plan for the community as a whole to address this issue. And to date, a total of 10 plans have been published, and some of those cover multiple states. Next slide. And so in California, the litter strategy process is co-led by NOAA and the OPC. And so we're just really lucky to have this really strong partner at the state level. And, you know, really can't understate how much we value the partnership of the OPC and their commitment to this process. So this is just an image of the cover of the strategy, which was published in 2018. Next slide. And so the strategy was really kind of presented as an update to the OPC's 2008 ocean litter strategy, which was really focused on state agency actions. And so we wanted to update that 2008 document after 10 years and expand it to include actions and priorities across sectors similar to the other regional plans. So the intent of the strategy is really to improve coordination among organizations doing marine debris work in California, galvanize action on addressing the issue, provide a mechanism for us to track progress over time, and of course, to inform decision makers and funding organizations. So next slide. So the actual content of the strategy, there are 64 actions organized under 6 goals. So the first one has actions related to government policies and incentives to reduce the distribution and sale of common ocean litter items. Goal 2 focuses on extended producer responsibility and changes in product design to prevent ocean litter. So those first 2 are really focused on source reduction. Goal 3 actions cover waste management and interception of litter on land before it reaches the ocean. Goal 4 is focused on research into microplastics and macro debris, including characterization, quantification, pathways and impacts, as well as assessing the effectiveness of existing mitigation policies. Goal 5 targets behavior change through educating students and consumers to raise awareness and drive changes in purchasing. And then goal 6 is our ocean-based debris goal, which looks at reducing gear loss and improving the cleanup of fishing and aquaculture gear. So next slide. This is just from an analysis that Tanya did to compare the different regional action plans to each other. But here we're looking at debris types that these 64 actions target, and single-use plastics and other general consumer debris are the most common targets, followed by microplastics and lost fishing gear. So next slide. And then again, this is looking at all of the actions, but in terms of the type of action being proposed. So the strategy addresses a lot of research needs, policy initiatives, and prevention efforts. And less common, but also included are coordination, removal, and actions intended to assist underserved or underrepresented communities. Next slide. So NOAA and OPC work together to track progress on the actions. So the green text here is actually a link to a public Google spreadsheet that serves as our sort of living tracking document. And thank you, Tanya, for pasting that into the chat if anyone wants to check it out. But basically for each action, there's a column for the lead organization and partner organizations. And the leads here are organizations that committed, to the best of their ability, given organizational, funding, and other constraints, to try to implement that action over the course of the 6-year strategy. And partner organizations, of course, volunteered to support the lead organizations. Then there's a link to view progress reports that have been submitted, and sort of a brief progress update summary that's updated every reporting period. And so the example here is just from one of the research actions to develop a watershed scale program to model and monitor microplastics and macro debris flux, transport, degradation, and fate. And so this is a project that SFEI has led with a number of partners, and you can see kind of the progress update summary there. Next slide. So we solicit progress reports every 6 months, and here we're just looking at the number of progress reports submitted each reporting period. And so, we know that we're not receiving progress reports from all entities working on ocean litter strategy actions, but we are, pleased so far with what we're getting, and also pleased to see this sort of increasing trend recently. And like I said, there are 64 actions in the strategy, but not all of them have lead organizations assigned. So those, we consider those orphan actions that we don't necessarily expect to receive progress reports on, but do hope that someone will adopt those over the tenure of the strategy. And then lastly, just a quick plug for those on the call that are involved in this process, that we are hoping to receive the next round of progress reports by November 25th. Next slide. So in terms of how does this relate to trash monitoring? The first thing I want to point out, and Christine kind of teed this up, there is crossover between the ocean litter strategy and this trash monitoring work group. So there are a number of organizations that participate in both, including UC Riverside, SFEI, LA County, OPC, and NOAA, and I'm sure there are others that I'm just not thinking of, but there are also some actions that are related to things that this work group has been discussing. So a lot of text here, but from goal 3, the waste management goal, there's an action on engaging with social programs to reduce ocean litter from encampments. And in goal 4, there are a handful of trash monitoring related actions, including the watershed scale model that I just mentioned, an action to create a comprehensive litter data set, which our colleagues from UC Riverside are working on. Action 4.1.5 is to capture brand data during Coastal Cleanup Day, and 4.4.2 to analyze the impact of the bag ban on preventing ocean litter. There are also, in the goal 5, which is kind of the behavior change education component, there is some sort of education connections where California Sea Grant is developing an urban trash monitoring curriculum for sort of street litter. And what the ocean litter strategy, doesn't really focus on is actions related to citizen science or data sharing to a strong extent. So I really, I think that the ocean litter strategy and the trash monitoring work group complement each other rather than duplicating effort. And we do intend to continue sharing information and capturing accomplishments under both. So next slide. So this is the timeline that was developed by the stakeholders when we published the strategy. And so the red arrow here is where we are now, a little over 2 years into the 6-year strategy. And we have webinars every 6 months that coincide with the progress reporting. And we planned to host an in-person workshop every 2 years. But this summer, of course, we had to adapt and had what we called a supersized webinar back in June. And then not shown here are the goal-based work groups that we just launched to facilitate more information sharing between stakeholders. And the goal is to have those work group meetings twice a year in the fall and the spring, kind of midway between the webinars. And I'll give a little bit more information about that in just a second. Next slide. So how to get involved. I encourage everyone to sign up for our listserv, which is a Google group linked here, and Tanya's just shared that link too in the chat. Thank you. Our next webinar is coming up in just a few weeks on December 2nd from 1 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. And we'll be sharing information on that via the listserv, and hopefully can get it out to the trash monitoring work group as well. And lastly, the work groups are a great way to kind of dig into the details on current efforts and who's doing what related to the litter strategy actions. And the next meetings of those should be scheduled for March. Next slide, please. So yeah, just again on the work groups, there are 6 work groups, 1 per goal. And like I mentioned, most of the trash monitoring related actions are captured under goal 4, the research goal. And so that work group is being led by Tanya and I, but our work is, the trash monitoring work is also relevant to goal 3, which is going to be led by Erica Yelensky and Jenny Stevenson from EPA Region 9. So if you sign up for the listserv, you'll receive more information about those work groups and the meetings. But either way, feel free to reach out to me and I'll get you the information that you need. And then next slide. I think it's the last one. Yeah. So just, thanks for the opportunity to kind of share about the ocean litter strategy and your attention. And I'm happy to take any questions or let Tanya or Holly jump in on anything that I missed.
All right. Does anybody have any questions? All right. I guess, Sherry, what can we do to help you here in the monitoring work group? Is there something directly that we can do to help the two groups in particular that we would relate to the most? Is it simply just participating in those work groups, or is there some information that we can get to you to provide those groups to help them better make decisions and move forward?
Yeah, I think that, participating in the work groups would be awesome. And that's a good opportunity to share updates with the participants in the ocean litter strategy effort that might not necessarily be part of the monitoring work group. Also, we haven't really talked about it, but I think at a future webinar, at a future ocean litter strategy webinar, it'd be really great to have, you or Christine kind of share an update on this group. And also, especially, I think, the monitoring methods project that Shelley, that you and Tony have been working on, we really look forward to sharing the results of that with the rest of the ocean litter strategy. I think it's really relevant. Holly, is there anything else you would add?
I don't think so. I would just second that. I think it would be great to have some crossover in participation in the ocean litter strategy work groups as well as with this work group, because there is a lot of complementary effort going on, and I think these two processes can leverage off each other.
All right, great. Well, thank you. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Sherry. All right, so we have one more speaker, and let me, so one of the things that we discussed when we were coming up with the changes to the charter relative to making it more acceptable of diversity, was not just putting some language in the charter. We wanted to do something about it. One of the things that I realized, I belong to a group here in Southern California called the Southern California Academy of Sciences. And as part of our conversations, we've been trying to come up with ways of not just talking about it, but actually doing something. So what we wanted to do was have a presentation today that kind of lent itself to getting you to think more and educating you more about these kinds of things that have been coming up recently. So we have a guest speaker today to talk to us about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Ezra Miller, she is a environmental scientist and is working at SFEI. Her graduate work focused on plant uptake and accumulation of organic contaminants, and Ezra also assists with emerging contaminants research and provides toxicology expertise for the Bay and Delta monitoring programs. And what I would tell you is that Ezra has also been involved with CTAC, and let me pull my information up, and has most recently written a couple of articles, and I can provide you the links to those articles. The first is LGBTQ plus experiences in STEM, and also disability in CTAC, what we can do better. And those are available online, and I can provide you with those links. So I would like to turn it over to Ezra. Thank you for being with us today, and I look forward to your presentation.
Sure, thank you, Shelley. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes.
Great, perfect. I can never tell if you can see my correct screen or the presenter view. All right, so starting off, I wanted to say that probably a lot of you have already met me. I have been at some of these meetings before because I am working on microplastics at SFEI, and sometimes y'all talk about microplastics. You may have met me as Liz. Since then, I have come out as transgender and have changed my name, so please don't use that name anymore. And related to that, please also don't use she, her pronouns for me. This is calling Shelly in right now during that introduction.
I
Shelly
apologize.
used the wrong pronouns. So my pronouns are ze, zir, zirs. Those may be really unfamiliar to a lot of you. So here's a quick example of how to use them. So instead of she, you replace it with z. Instead of her, you replace that with zir. So I saw Ezra's talk at a trash monitoring work group meeting. Z talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, including how to use zir pronouns. If that is still like way too difficult for you, I'm also okay with singular they, them pronouns, or even he, him pronouns. But having she, her pronouns to me says that you are not recognizing my trans identity. So of all the pronouns to choose, it would make me feel super warm and fuzzy to use easier, but there's lots of choices if that's too difficult. So like Shelly said, I'm part of the Clean Water program at SFEI. I'm also, along with Tony, part of our internal DEIJ work. I do a lot of non-work related activism, and I'm part of the CTAC Inclusive Diversity Committee. I'll share these slides with you all. The Globe articles that Shelly just mentioned are a great introduction to not only LGBTQ and disability issues, those are the articles I wrote, but there's articles about Indigenous people and Black experiences and social media interactions and all sorts of things. Also, if you're part of CTAC and you're planning on being at the SciCon 2 meeting next week, then we are having an inclusive diversity social to talk more about these issues, and I would really encourage you to join us on Wednesday evening. And then I just wanted to say, all of this is not necessarily meaning that I'm bringing to you SFEI's viewpoints or CTAC's viewpoints. These are all my personal viewpoints. Many of you may have more experience with DEIJ issues. So I'm excited to hear your points of view as well. I am not an expert. I just am really interested in this sort of stuff. And if you shout loud enough, sometimes you get noticed. So I wanted to focus on ways that we can engage and act on DEIJ efforts, not just what is the problem. I think we're all pretty aware of the problems, but what can we do? And I think of that in kind of three different lenses. So the first is our personal or individual actions. So focusing once again on our professional work lives as environmental scientists, although I'm happy to talk about my other activism in my free time offline. The second is, well, the second and third are both organization level, but thinking about whether we're thinking internal to the organization or external to the organization. So things internal to the organization is things like our hiring and leadership and policies and the internal organizational culture, whereas external to the organization is how we interact with partners, who those partners are, what kinds of communications we are having with the outside of that organization world. So starting with individual actions, I guess I should say before this that I tried to have a focus on environmental work and even specifically like trash and microplastic monitoring, but honestly, environmental science as a whole is not really far enough along in DEIJ to have really, really specific things that we need to work on just on trash monitoring. It's much more general because we're still pretty far behind where we could be. So I'm sorry that it's not as perfectly like aligned to trash monitoring as some of these other talks that you've seen today, but I think that this hopefully will still be helpful to think about. The first thing is educating yourself. So attending this talk is a great start, but there's so much to learn. I'm still learning every day about new things, new experiences that other people are old experiences that are new to me that other people are having. Educating yourself can be really uncomfortable, especially white people. We can easily get kind of sucked into a guilt and shame spiral over what our ancestors have done, what our culture does now. And so I think it's really important to recognize that and then set that shame and guilt aside and focus on courage and compassion and vulnerability of yourself and of the people who you're advocating for or speaking with. Third, be mindful. It's so easy to be, it's easy to not be racist, but it's hard to be anti-racist. It's easy to not be overtly ableist, but it's hard to be anti-ableist. So I think you really do have to think through all of your actions. So maybe that's when you're inviting speakers, are you really choosing a diverse speaker set, or are you going with your first thoughts who are probably going to be white cis men, as an example? And then supporting and promoting organization level DEIJ efforts, whether that's through your home organization or through things like this work group, I think is really important. And then finally, being yourself a model for positive intention and change to help change the overall culture of environmental science to be more inclusive and diverse. So one easy, concrete way that you can do that is by doing a land acknowledgement. So normally in a scientific talk, this would be my first slide after my title slide. We're all over California. California is the colonized land, well, and actually all over the US. All of the US is the colonized land of very diverse groups of indigenous peoples. I personally live in the ancestral unceded Ohlone territory, which is also known as the East Bay. If you don't know where your, or like whose land you live on, then an easy place to start is this nativeland.ca. And it's just a map that you can zoom in anywhere and see all the different peoples whose land you live on. Why would you do a land acknowledgement? This takes up time in your 12-minute talk. Well, a couple of reasons. The first, educating yourself and also your peers, your audience, about the region's indigenous history, to pay respect to those peoples, both their past and their ongoing experiences. But this isn't like a end-all be-all. Doing a land acknowledgement is just the very tiny start of more actions. So just doing a land acknowledgement isn't enough. It's just this, it should just be the start of your action. So for example, as someone who lives in the East Bay, I give Shumi, which is an indigenous land tax that helps rematriate indigenous land and care for the land. There's various land tax organizations, depending on where you live. This resourcegeneration.org has some links. This is just, like I said, that's just that tiny first step, and encouraging others to do the same. I also think it's important to be an ally, regardless of when you're working. So just a couple of pointers for effective allyship. The first is to listen to marginalized people and take appropriate action when they ask for some kind of change. So for example, I just asked for all of you to use my pronouns that I prefer. So then the next step is to actually use my pronouns, and not just when I'm in the room, but also when you're talking about me with others and I'm not around, to try and use those pronouns. When to recognize and call out biased behavior. This is especially important if a marginalized person has asked you to help them call out that behavior. It takes a lot of mental energy to constantly deal with microaggressions. And so oftentimes people don't want to have to be the one to call that out when it's directly affecting them. I'm saying calling out, but actually what I'm really meaning is calling in. a call out is basically a way of shaming someone else. And that's not what we want to do, because there's all sorts of research that shows that shame is not an effective motivator for change. So calling in is a way to recognize, or is a similar thing, but it recognizes that people are multifaceted, and one instance of oppressive behavior does not define who they are, and they probably don't mean to be oppressive or horrible in any way. They may just not know. And so a call in is a way to say, hey, I know that you are trying, or I don't know if you know this, but this is kind of offensive, and here's why. So I think that's a much better way of doing that. And sometimes that means having a private conversation instead of something in front of everyone. So I'm sorry, Shelley, to call you out in front of everyone about the pronouns. Making a space for and lifting up marginalized voices. So I mentioned earlier, if you're inviting speakers, make sure that you're including marginalized voices. Thank you for including me as someone to give this talk, although I will also say I have a lot of privilege as a white person. So maybe next time invite a person of color. Also recognize that no marginalized identity is a monolith. Even within any identity, there's a diversity of experiences. So you don't want to have one person speaking for everyone. And then finally, I'm just going to keep saying it, keep educating yourself, and don't be afraid to make mistakes. We can't learn without messing up. And so I would rather, I'm going to come back to the pronouns thing, I would rather have you try to use my pronouns and totally mess it up than not use my pronouns because you're afraid of not using them perfectly. And then I just wanted to recognize also that this is a long struggle, a long game. This is not something that we can change today and tomorrow. I would love that, but the reality is that this is something that we're going to be having to work on throughout our careers. So just some advice from John Lewis. This is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It's the struggle of a lifetime. So find ways that you can engage with it sustainably for your own mental health, but don't be afraid to get into good trouble. Okay, so coming to an organizational level, one of the reasons why I'm not specifically just talking about what we can do while we're monitoring for trash is because at an organizational level, environmental science as a whole has a real problem with diversity. And I don't want to really stick too much on the problem front, but just one of the problems is that we have a real lack of people of color in environmental organizations, as you can see by this graph. Another problem is we have a real lack of data about diversity in environmental organizations. So this is one of the only graphs I could find. It's from 2014 from this report, which is really awesome, but it would be great to have more data. I loved what Shelley said right before this, that you all are interested in not just writing a diversity statement, but actually doing some kind of work and active change. And I would add to that diversity statements on their own, without a plan and self-assessment, that data, continue to just be words on paper without having actions and then also assessing whether those actions are effective. What are you really doing? So good job, trash monitoring work group, for getting beyond just the words on paper, but I would encourage you to have some kind of self-assessment plan as part of that. In terms of more business organizations, retaining diverse staff requires more than just hiring diverse staff. You also have to change the internal culture, because honestly, hiring diverse staff without inclusive culture means that you're just going to have a lot of turnover, and it might even make some of these problems worse. One way of helping with changing the culture is to incorporate diversity goals into things like performance evaluations, but I also think it's really important to incorporate diversity goals into every project that you're doing. And to do this effectively, you have to allocate resources, so time and money. So thank you for giving me the time to talk. And then finally, I think all of your internal policies need to really reflect those organizational values. So for example, I'm going to pick on SFEI a little bit. We have really great internal values regarding diversity, but sometimes our policies don't necessarily reflect that. So for example, we do a lot of purchasing from Amazon, and I would argue that Amazon's own internal and external values do not necessarily jive with that of SFEI. So maybe we should find a different supplier for a lot of our purchasing, as an example. Another example is that in job advertisements and requirements, we often include that you must be able to lift 20 pounds. And for disability advocacy, that's kind of a stupid thing to include. That's to be able to lift a ream of paper, but how often do you really need to lift a ream of paper? Does everyone in the organization need to be able to lift a ream of paper? Probably not. In terms of trash monitoring and environmental science, we often really prioritize field work, but maybe there are ways to make being part of this type of work more accessible by including people who don't have to do field work, but can do a lot of the data management, etc. I want to point out that you don't have to start from zero to start building an anti-racist laboratory or an anti-racist organization or an anti-ableist organization. There's a lot of work that's been done already and a lot of like simple rules or simple tips that are actually really great concrete advice for you to start changing your culture and your efforts. So here's one example. In terms of external DEIJ work, thinking about stakeholders, who is at the table and who has a voice. I know this group is really focused on people experiencing homelessness or houselessness. I missed the first part of that conversation, so now I'm like, oh no, I don't know which is the correct term anymore. Are advocates for those people at the table? Do they have a voice? Are Native people who are the indigenous to your area that you're monitoring, are they at the table? Do they have a voice, etc.? Similarly, for your project focuses, who is the project serving and how are they being involved? You can't just come in as an outside environmental scientist and try and fix something without talking with the people who are directly impacted by whatever you're doing. And they probably have a lot of knowledge that you may be discounting if they don't have the environmental science background that you do. They do have knowledge about their local issues that can be really important and help solve bigger problems. So for example, with trash monitoring, once again, are you actually talking with the people experiencing homelessness who live in that area? Or are you just coming in as an outsider and making assumptions about how they are generating trash and what is happening with that? Communications I think are incredibly important as scientists in general, especially environmental scientists. But oftentimes our communications are not very accessible. So I know I love how into open source data Win is, but I think that that should extend also to all of our reports and all of our websites. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. Finally, fieldwork policies. How do you interact with people when you're in the field? And also, what are your emergency type procedures? So picking on SFEI again, we're gearing up for hopefully the stormwater monitoring season will start soon here in the Bay Area. And we have a list of emergency numbers for all the different counties that we may be monitoring in, but it's all like the police numbers. And in an emergency, I may be willing to call the police, but I personally don't necessarily want to call the police unless there's literally no other option, because the police have a history of violence against a lot of marginalized people, and I don't want to be the cause of any of that violence. And oftentimes, what I think is an emergency can maybe be better addressed by someone like a social worker than it can be by someone like a police officer who is just trained to escalate violence. So those are some things to think about. I wanted to come back to the communications in my last few minutes. As Shelley mentioned, I am really interested in disability and accessibility. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about universal design. And this would work way better in person because I cannot see you all. But does anyone know what this picture is of? Just unmute and shout it out.
Something that's used.
Is that for like a crosswalk?
Crosswalk?
Crosswalk is correct. So the technical name for these bumps is tactile paving or truncated domes. They're a really, really great example of universal design. So quick history lesson. The Americans with Disabilities Act was first passed in June, I think, of 1990. And before that, crosswalks didn't have ramps necessarily, which meant that people who use wheelchairs couldn't easily use them. And so the ADA was passed, and now all of the crosswalks needed to have ramps, which is not just useful for people who use wheelchairs, but also for people who have baby carriages or a suitcase or a grocery cart, lots of reasons why ramps are really helpful. But the lack of that curb meant that people with visual impairments couldn't easily tell when they were in the crosswalk anymore because they didn't have that indicator of the curb to go on. And so some genius invented truncated domes, which are, they don't impede the use of wheelchairs or baby carriages or anything from rolling on that ramp, but they allow visually impaired people to use a crosswalk. So that's a great example of universal design that has absolutely nothing to do with environmental monitoring, but it's a good example because it really embodies a lot of the principles of universal design, which are for the most part incredibly intuitive and obvious when you read them. But it's just like being anti-racist, being anti-ableist takes some kind of like active thinking to really include all of these in all of your communications efforts. So coming back to environmental science, I wanted to talk a little bit about some examples. So CDIN is super great in that it makes environmental data accessible to anyone. And I really love that. However, if you have ever tried to use CDIN, you will know that it is not very accessible. Its interface is not intuitive. It's very difficult to navigate. It requires you to download files to see the data. You have to have a pretty high level of expertise to understand all the different categories and abbreviations and tags. And also, this probably is something you are not aware of, but the website is not screen reader friendly, so people with visual impairments would probably have trouble using it. As an example of not necessarily fixing everything, but just slightly more accessible, SFEI hosts CD3, which is another open data source that has overlapping data sets. So it's not exactly the same data as in CDIN, but some of it is the same. And CD3 is not perfect, but it's much more intuitively designed, and you can view the data in the map itself instead of trying to look at a giant Excel table. There are a lot fewer abbreviations or codes, and it is actually more screen reader friendly. As a test, I had my partner, who is fairly scientifically literate, but is definitely a layperson, not a scientist, try and find PFAS data in California using both of these, and they were able to like read and understand a lot of the information in CD3, and they basically got nowhere with CDIN. So just something to think about in terms of it's one thing to make your data publicly accessible, but it's another thing to actually make your data publicly accessible. And I mean, both of these, they don't have Spanish language translations, for example. So a lot of people still probably couldn't use these resources. So that's all I have for now. My contact info is here. Like I said, I will share the slides with Shelley, and then they can be shared with all of you. And I hope this was thought-provoking at least a little bit. And I'm happy to take any questions or start a conversation. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Ezra. And I apologize for my misuse of the pronoun. And I appreciate that you said that you'd rather have somebody make a mistake than try to be perfect about it, because that is something that I'm struggling with a lot, is wanting to be perfect about it. And I told myself before I introduced you not to say that particular pronoun, and it came out of my mouth. So I apologize. Thank you for the awesome presentation. That was great. I learned so much. Does anybody have any questions for Ezra?
This is Shelley Walther. I want to echo what Shelley Moore said. Just thank you so much, Ezra, for the amazing presentation. For me, it's really timely because in the last, for those of you that don't know, I'm the official Monitoring Council sponsor for the trash work group. And I brought up in the last Monitoring Council meeting that I suggested that we have a DEIJ subcommittee and start to think about those issues and implement some change based on that. And it was turned back to me that I should present to the council in our December meeting why we need that, or what would DEIJ do for the Water Monitoring Council. And I'm actually agreed to have a cis white male come and present on it, so I can see issues right there. But the reason is it's Greg Gearhart, and he has some experience with this in the State Water Board. And I wanted to kind of see what the State Water Board has done as a starting point, because I know they have done some work internally on this topic. But I'm very interested in what you have to say, and I'm going to contact you separately. Also, you brought up CEDN. I'm very well versed in data issues. I started out, early in my career working with trash data and data of all types for water quality monitoring. And just recently, like last week, I was in CEDN trying to extract the Byte 13 trawl data, because I know that we put it in there. We worked with Swamp and CEDN, and I know that it was through the tissues, so I kind of knew where it was. I couldn't find it. And there was a question to me, well, there's no place for trawl data, right? And I said, yes, there is. And I was trying to give them an example, and I couldn't find it. And so if I can't find those data, who can, And so I still haven't found them. So thank you for bringing that up. That's just incredibly relevant right now, because the integrative report is asking for data right now for considerations for TMDL. So it's just very timely. Thank you so much, and I will be in touch. Really appreciate everything. And I know it was uncomfortable, but I think that Shelley Moore's misuse of your pronouns was actually very instructive to all of us. It was almost like you couldn't have planned it better. So I know that was at your expense, Ezra, but thank you.
Cool, thank you so much, Shelley. I just want to say, it's totally fine to include cis white men as speakers. Like, I don't want to say never invite them. Sometimes they are the right person and they have the most expertise. The problem is that when we just automatically assume that the people who we have heard of and we know already are the best possible speakers, that excludes a lot of people who are also doing really great work on related topics. So just being slightly more mindful about who you're choosing. And sometimes you do choose a cis white man, and that's okay.
Yeah, he offered, and I was great, and he gave some background, and it sounded perfect to me. But I am going to keep that in mind and have that discussion with him, and maybe include some additional speakers. So thank you.
Anybody else have any comments or questions for Ezra?
I just have a quick one. This is Tony. So Ezra, thank you very much for your presentation. I apologize for the noise in the background. So you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion and justice, it is embracing of a number of different differences in themselves, right? You know, gender, sexuality, ability, race, socioeconomic status. Are there certain, within those different forms of diversity, have you found in your experience that people in our world, the world of kind of science and agencies and natural resource management, different forms of diversity people are comfortable talking about and forms that they are less comfortable talking about? And I ask that not just to kind of like cast that out in the open, which has some value, but also just are there strategies for entering through the easy things to talk about, but eventually making your way and not neglecting those forms of diversity that we need to talk about, but which we might be less comfortable doing so? I want to know if you've given any thought to that.
Sure. I mean, I think that in some ways, race is a really easy thing for people to talk about. I think a lot of people in environmental science recognize that we have kind of a racial disparity in terms of who is working in the field. And especially with the larger national conversation around racial justice that's happening right now, I think that race is actually a really good example of a good place to start, especially because it is something that needs to be worked on. I would say that in general, where I have seen the most pushback or discomfort is talking about disability, especially so in science in general, we tend to be really focused on our minds. And so any talk of any kind of mental disability especially is very uncomfortable for a lot of people. And that's really upsetting because a lot of people have some kind of mental disability or mental illness, including a lot of our colleagues, including me. I have ADHD and depression, and we don't talk about it because it is so much connected to what we value about ourselves. And in general, in our country, we definitely have a very ableist outlook in terms of what how we treat people with disabilities and how we think about illness and experiencing illness. You fight an illness, which is, if you lose the fight, then you are seen as lesser oftentimes. Anyway, so I would say like those types of conversations are a lot harder for a lot of people in our field. The racial conversations, I think, is a good place to start because it is something that people are thinking about outside of work as well right now.
Thank you.
Jeremiah?
Yeah, Ezra, I just want to say thanks so much for your talk, and I really appreciate your guts. It's really takes a lot of guts to talk about this stuff, so thank you.
Thanks, and thanks for all of these resources that you're posting in the chat. I will have to take a look at them.
Yeah, there's actually, I just searched for DEIJ, and the top of the list are a lot of environmental and ecological sites, so that's encouraging.
Awesome. Thank you guys. And thank you, Ezra, for your awesome talk. Appreciate it. Thanks to all of our speakers today. And I think what we'll do is Christine and I will go ahead and add that language to our charter. And if we can, at the beginning of the next meeting, we'll just put it out for vote at that point and see what everybody says. We'll send you the link. If you guys have any questions or comments on it, let us know in the meantime. Christine, did you want to say anything?
No, I mostly just want to thank everybody. We had a lot of great talks today, and I know we packed a lot of people in to the agenda, but I really appreciate getting to hear about all these different topics in one meeting, one long Zoom. And I also wanted to point out that a lot of the talks we had today were because people reached out to us and said, I would love to talk to your group to figure out how we can collaborate. And so I hope that people will continue to do that so we can continue to have these full agendas of topics that everyone is interested in. or topics people don't even know about that are helpful to everyone.
Great.
So
yes,
please let us know if you have an idea.
Yes, please do.
Are you I'm sorry for interrupting. Are you looking for topics or speakers for the next meeting?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that was the other thing that I was gonna say to you guys, or that Christine and I have talked about, is if you guys have an interest in a particular topic or want to have a speaker on a particular topic, let us know, and we can reach out to folks and see if we can get somebody to cover that topic. So what we're looking for is a meeting in February, March area, and we will send out a doodle poll over the next couple of weeks and put a date down so we know when we're going to have our next meeting. Thank you guys for participating and appreciate it. Please stay safe, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Great meeting.
Thanks.
And right on time. Woo!
That was the goal.
Amazing. Good job, Shelley.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.